A Right to be a Child.
Written and performed by
McKall Henrie,
Taylor Urner,
and Reily Pike. Fresh flowers, fresh flowers!
Papers! Get
Fresh
your papers
flowers,
here!
apples, 5 cents!
Children have always worked, whether helping around the house or around the farm. Generations of America's children have worked alongside their parents, building a sense of pride, commitment, and community.
In the 1800s, the economy of the United States was expanding and growing at an unprecedented rate. A new industrial revolution demanded an army of workers for factories, canneries, mines, and mills. The owners of these industries found a new source of labor to run their machines. The children of poor families operating the power-driven machines did not require adult strength. Little hands were perfect for turning levers or unclogging dangerous machines. Children could be hired more cheaply than adults. They were more manageable and less likely to strike.
But factory work was hard. A child worked 12 to 18 hours a day, 6 days a week, to earn $1. Most children began working before the age of 7. The working children had no time to play or to go to school. The factories were damp and dirty. Often, the children got sick.
My name is Mary. I work the spinner at Cornell Mill. I brush lint off bobbins and tie threads together when they break off the spindles. I don't wear no shoes, so I can climb up the machine. Gotta be careful. Them bobbins could take a finger or toe real easy. A friend of mine, Sadie, had long hair. Got it caught in a bob, scalped her for sure. She was back to work the next day, though, wearing a kerchief to have the bald patch. We work hard, me, Sadie, and the other girls. Long hours, too, for days and days. Sometimes I wonder what it would be like to be outside, to feel the sun on my face, and to smell the fresh air, and to run and run and run. Far, far away from here.
By 1905, 1.5 million American children under the age of 16 were working. Church leaders, labor groups, and teachers were outraged by the cruelty of child labor. Reformists like Jane Addams and Owen Lovejoy made speeches and wrote letters demanding government action.
Jane, the public's eyes must be open to the horrors of child labor. Let me tell you, right here, that these children are robbed of their childhood and their dignity, that they're denied the right to read and write, that they're doomed to a life of poverty and ignorance.
There's work that profits children, and there's work that brings profit only to their employers. Mr. Lovejoy, the object of employing children is not to train them, but to receive the highest profit possible from their work.
I agree, but state laws against child labor have strongly been ignored.
Yes, we must enact a national law that will be strictly enforced. Child labor must end.
Child labor must end. The National Child Labor Committee, organized by Owen Lovejoy, was desperate to publicize the plight of America's working children. Louis Hine, a former teacher and an avid photographer, was hired by the NCLC as a full-time investigator in 1908, which was a turning point for the children of America. Hine would travel the country, taking notes and photographing the exploitation of children.
I had the rare opportunity to join one of the great causes of our time. I would use my camera as a weapon against those who would condemn children to a lifetime of hard labor. My one and only goal was to open the public's eyes to the horrors of child labor and to move them into action.
As Louis Hine traveled, he found kids that work in every part of the country. Textile mills in the South were the biggest offenders, where 1 in every 4 workers was a child.
Yesterday, I found 2 little sisters spinning. Their grandmother told me they were only 6 and 7. I found 2 boys under 10 whose hands were mutilated in the mills. I found an entire family, a mother and 5 children, none of which who could write their names.
Hine traveled the country taking pictures. In 12 months, He covered over 50,000 miles by automobile and train. When factory owners refused permission to take photos, Hein disguised himself as a fire inspector or an insurance salesman.
I made no attempt to exaggerate the poverty of these young people. My pictures captured the heartbreaking reality. Magazines and newspapers printed my pictures in 1909. 2 books were published featuring my work.
Hein's photos publicized what many had refused to believe. They stand as graphic evidence that industrial America is mistreating children. For 8 years, Hein wrote brochures and pamphlets, creating photo story of his work. He lectured wherever the NCLC sent him.
There has been no convincing proof of the absolute necessity of child labor, for these pictures show the suffering, the degradation, and the lack of anything that is wholesome in the lives of these poor little wage earners. It is terrible to admit that such things exist in a civilized country.
Hein's work compelled people into action. The NCLC demanded an 8-hour workday, no nights, work permits, and compulsory school attendance for children under the age of 16. Opposition came from expected and unexpected sources. Employers and trade associations complained about higher costs and a lost competition. Poor families complained about lost income. Even some working children said that they didn't want to give up their jobs.
Facing pressure from constituents, Congress passed the Keating-Owen Child Labor Act of 1916. This act prohibited the shipment or delivery through interstate or foreign sale of any goods or services that were produced by laborers under the age of 14. Also, laborers under 16 years old can only work in 8 hours a day, 6 days a week.
2 years later, the Keating-Owen Child Labor Act was declared unconstitutional by the United States Supreme Court because it infringed on states' rights. Reformers continued pressuring Congress for change. In 1924, Congress passed a constitutional amendment that would authorize a national child labor law, but most states refused to ratify it. This was devastating news to reformers, the NCLC, and Lewis Hein.
It took the Great Depression to end child labor nationwide. Adults had become so desperate for jobs that they would work for the same wage as children. In 1938, President Franklin D. Roosevelt signed the Fair Labor Standards Act, which, among other things, established a minimum age of employment and hours of work for children.
Still, child labor has not vanished from America. It still exists today among the children of immigrants who toil next to their mothers behind the closed doors of sweatshops. It still exists today among 500,000 poverty-stricken children of migrant farm workers who pick our food.
It still exists among hundreds of students who work excessive hours while attending school.
It still exists today in third world countries where 246 million children between the ages of 5 and 17 labor like adults. The dedication of the National Child Labor Committee and the photographic work of Lewis Hein became the driving force that turned the American people against child labor. Who will help create a turning point and be the Lewis Hein of Ethiopia, of Pakistan,
Of Myanmar.
the children of the world deserve the right to be a child.